Today at the National Press Club, the US Ambassador to Australia, Caroline Kennedy. She will discuss the outgoing Biden administration and touch on the impact a second Trump administration will have on Australia and the world. Caroline Kennedy with today's National Press Club address.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the National Press Club and the Westpac Address, where we are meeting on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, Canberra. My name is Laura Tingle. I'm the club's president. The United States of America has been much on our minds of late, as has the nature of our national relationship with an old ally at an historic point of political transition. But the US was front of mind long before November 5 for other reasons, with the AUKUS alliance, initially announced in late 2021, representing a hardening not just of ties with the US, but Australian enmeshment in US military capability and strategy. Our guest today is said to have played a key role behind the scenes to secure congressional support for the building blocks of AUKUS, which includes easing US export rules to allow the transfer of nuclear-powered technology and submarines. And she has given new meaning to the term soft power in her prominence in the Pacific and in supporting Pacific nations' push for more action on climate change. She addresses the club today as she prepares to leave the post of Ambassador to Australia and return to what no doubt will be a very different America. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Caroline Kennedy to the podium.
Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon, and thank you to the Press Club for inviting me here today. It's an honor to speak to all of you, as my predecessors have done, ministers, parliamentarians, CDF and senior defense officials, fellow diplomats, distinguished guests, journalists, embassy colleagues, and friends. Thank you for coming. And thank you for your flexibility in the last-minute change of plan. I know everyone's busy, so I'm really grateful. I'd like to begin by paying my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and to all First Nations people. I'd like to pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and thank you for the many lessons you've taught me about community, about resilience, caring for country, and passing knowledge to future generations. Attending the Garma Festival during my first week in Australia gave me an insight into the world's oldest continuous living culture and into the voice that dominated the public debate during my first year here. It was a privilege to meet Yunupingu, a hero of the global social justice movement, and to be able to pay my respects at his memorial service later. And I'm grateful to the artists at Yirrkala Arts Centre who helped me understand how caring for country is woven throughout their lives and in their work. And it came full circle when I welcomed the Yolngu delegation to New York City in September to open the Medellin exhibition, and we all ate lunch together in Central Park. I would like to thank Prime Minister Albanese and his government for the chance to work together to strengthen all aspects of our bilateral relationship, from AUKUS and our defense cooperation to combating climate change. We worked hard to safeguard and protect our critical mineral supply, and we increased our efforts to improve lives and livelihoods in the Pacific. As Laura said, we gathered just a week after an unprecedented US election, and the indications are all pointing towards change. Preparing for that change also gives us a chance to think about the continuity that has characterized this alliance for more than a century. I know that speakers often come here to announce new policy initiatives, but since President Biden's term and my own is coming to an end, I'd like to offer a few personal reflections on my time in Australia and what we still need to do. I also have a feeling that I might get asked about the election in the Q&A portion, so we can save the best for last. To the press corps, I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to get to know you better, because the work you do is absolutely critical. You hold government accountable, question power, and illuminate the complex issues of the day. In this age of growing disinformation, your work is more important than ever. But I had to make some hard choices. A U.S. ambassador leads a team of dedicated, expert, lifelong diplomats who develop and execute policy over multiple administrations. A political ambassador is the president's personal representative, his or her eyes and ears in a country. My assignment is to represent the United States to the people of Australia, not just to the government. And it's just as important to tell Washington what Australians are thinking as it is to tell Australia what DC is hoping for. And the only way to do that is to learn from as many people as possible and discover what our alliance really means to people on the ground. I wanted to see if the grand strategies and lofty principles are connected to the experiences of people who live them every day. And that's how I realized that magical things happen in Australia. Where else would eating a sausage in a parking lot on a rainy Saturday lead to a commitment by the leaders of 4 of the most powerful nations on earth to work together to eradicate a form of cancer? That sounds impossible, but it just happened. One of my classmates in Ambassador School challenged our class to send in photos of ourselves eating hot dog in our new country. People sent in pictures of themselves riding elephants and climbing mountains and outside Buckingham Palace. So I started worrying about what I was going to send in. And then I learned about Bunnings. Thanks to the 2 friendly dudes on the tongs at the Bunnings Sausage Sizzle, I learned about the Shitbox Rally, the largest community-based fundraiser for cancer research in Australia, where 400 people drive cars worth less than $1,500, thousands of miles across Australia's bumpiest roads, in honor and memory of friends and family with cancer. And I'm so happy that James Freeman, who started it all, is here today. Not only that, but communities along the way turn out to welcome them, feed them, help fix their cars, and wish them well. As I said, I'm grateful to James and also to Buddy Group 12, who was assigned to look after me and our embassy team and showed us the healing power of community. Like all families, my family has lost too many people we love to cancer. And the spirit of the Shitbox Rally captured my heart and my imagination, and I decided that I had to participate. More importantly, it furthered a presidential priority. One of President Biden's top priorities has been to end cancer as we know it, to cut cancer deaths in half by 2050. He calls it the cancer moonshot, after my father's bold promise to land a man on the moon, not because it was easy, but because it was hard, and because he knew it would bring out the best in us. And since I'm not an auto mechanic, I decided that the best way for me to prepare for the rally was to learn as much as possible about U.S.-Australia cancer collaboration. The people I met and the work they're doing was the strongest possible affirmation of the power of our alliance, not just to act on a global scale, but to achieve concrete results that are saving people's lives. I met researchers like Australian of the Year, Professor Georgina Long, who began her career as a Fulbright scholar in California. She and her colleague, Professor Richard Scolyer, have been recognized for their pioneering work in immunotherapy, and they will soon be working with U.S. partners. I visited world-leading centers of excellence like Peter Mac, which Vice President Biden visited in 2016, and is the foremost partner for U.S. government and research institutions. Professor Grant MacArthur and his team explained that in the past 10 years, the U.S. National Cancer Institute has awarded 211 grants to projects with Australian collaborators, making Australia the 3rd leading recipient of U.S. cancer funding globally. I met Kay and Greg Posch, whose cancer philanthropy is bringing Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and Royal North Shore Hospital together. The Poach has also provided initial funding for the network of Indigenous health centers, whose Kalinda Griffiths welcomed me to the International Indigenous Cancer Conference. There I learned about the equity and access challenges which are similar to those facing disadvantaged communities in the United States. I discovered how our systems are compatible and why Australia is the partner of choice for American drug companies trialing new drugs. And at Moderna, I learned how the lessons of COVID and mRNA technology are being applied here and in this region to the fight against cancer. I met giants like Professor Ian Fraser and Dr. Karen Canfell and leaders at Daffodil and Epic and Lucas Del Tocco, who's here too, who have put Australia on track to be the first country to eradicate a form of cancer by 2035. And I met Dr. Ted Trimble and researchers at the U.S. National Cancer Institute who have spent their careers working to eradicate cervical cancer. They told me that while cervical cancer vaccine and screenings are routine in the U.S. and Australia, fewer than 10% of women in the Indo-Pacific have completed their vaccination series or had recent screening. Cervical cancer claims the lives of about 150,000 women in the Indo-Pacific every year, making it the third leading cause of death among women in the region. And I was shocked to hear that globally 40% of women diagnosed with cervical cancer are abandoned by their partners, and over 200,000 children are orphaned every year when their mothers die. And again, this cancer is almost entirely preventable. But there's hope. New forms of screening, one-dose vaccines, patches being developed here in Australia by Vaxxus are on the horizon. These innovations will dramatically lower the cost and revolutionize the screening for this disease. And I learned that Australia is already working in PNG to vaccinate, screen, and treat women and develop pilot programs that can be brought to scale. So when the White House requested ideas for the Quad, we had one. And 2 months ago, President Biden, Prime Ministers Albanese, Kishida, and Modi announced the Quad Cancer Moonshot, which mobilizes millions of vaccines, over $150 million of investment from governments and philanthropy, and will save hundreds of thousands of lives in Southeast Asia and the Pacific in the coming decades. That's in addition to the other lines of effort that the Quad is pursuing to deliver tangible benefits to the region, combating illegal fishing and drug trafficking through increased maritime domain awareness, providing humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, cybersecurity, and law enforcement training. The Quad Fellowship Program has expanded to include graduate students from across Southeast Asia who will now study in all Quad countries and be a source of innovation and collaboration for years to come. As you all know, the Quad was started in 2004 after the Indonesian tsunami, elevated to the foreign minister level during the Trump administration and to the leader level by President Biden. There is now a bipartisan, bicameral Quad caucus in the U.S. Congress as well. And when I was in Wilmington for the most recent summit, every leader made clear the Quad is here to stay. So that's just one example of the continuity of U.S. engagement in this region over decades and the importance that the Biden administration has placed on strengthening our work with allies and partners. President Biden's work to modernize our alliances has been global and multilateral. It's an expression of his deeply held belief that America's greatest strength is in our network of relationships. He recognizes that the challenges we face are worldwide in nature. He has re-energized NATO, bringing 50 countries together to support Ukraine against Russia's brutal invasion, including Australia, which has been one of the most generous supporters. The President has brought Japan and Korea closer than at any recent time, meeting their leaders at Camp David and last week again on the margins of APEC. And the President restored our presence in the Pacific, hosting 2 leader summits at the White House, opening 5 new embassies, and returning Peace Corps to the region. These efforts result from the reality that our strategic environment is becoming more dangerous. The rules-based international order, which has brought peace and prosperity, is being challenged in new and destabilizing ways. What happens in Europe and the Atlantic directly affects the Indo-Pacific. When sovereignty is violated or foreign troops are introduced into a faraway conflict, it threatens all nations. We need look no further than the recent deployment of troops and ballistic missiles from the DPRK into Ukraine to see the implications for this region and understand why all countries, including the PRC, need to play a role in bringing conflict to an end. That's why the Biden administration advanced the most consequential and ambitious bilateral security agenda with Australia since World War II, making transformational commitments that will strengthen regional relationships, deter conflict, and preserve peace, while also investing in cutting-edge technology that will supercharge our economies and provide thousands of high-paying jobs. As maritime trading nations, the U.S. and Australia depend on freedom of navigation and open sea lanes for our prosperity and our very existence. That's why AUKUS deterrent effect is already a game changer. The progress in just the past 2 years may not yet be visible to the general public, but it is remarkable. The United States is sharing its nuclear technology for only the second time. All three countries have modified our export control regimes to increase license-free trade, which no one thought would ever happen. We have aligned and strengthened our protective security frameworks, bringing academia, industry, and government together. Australia is now one of only 2 countries eligible to compete for billions of dollars of funding under the Defense Production Act on the same terms as American companies. Collectively, we are investing in our industrial bases. We are training together, sailing together, and growing a new and younger workforce in the technologies of the future. Australian innovators and entrepreneurs are already developing world-leading companies in quantum, AI, autonomous vehicles, and the advanced capabilities of AUKUS Pillar 2. We've made tremendous progress, but we can't slow down. We are only 3 years away from the first rotational deployment of a Virginia-class submarine in Perth, and 8 years from the first sovereign Australian nuclear-powered submarine, which will be in service for decades. There's funding available, there is huge opportunity. The greater risks are those of inaction and delay. To those who still question whether AUKUS is necessary, ask the Philippines and Vietnam what it's like to have your ships rammed and sunk by Chinese Coast Guard vessels. Or ask Japan what happens when missiles land close to your shore, or the Pacific nations when your most precious resource is destroyed by an industrial-scale fishing armada. Ask our private sector what the consequences are from the damage to undersea cables in the Taiwan Strait. The long delays and higher prices that are resulting from the Middle East conflict are insignificant compared to the global consequences of a conflict in this region. AUKUS is an existential investment in Australia's sovereignty and way of life, and you can't put a price on that. Our Innovation Alliance has also made great progress. Australia is home to new data centers which will power AI throughout the region. New subsea cables will speed up information sharing, increase resilience, and allow remote island nations to build their economies. We are investing jointly in quantum sensing and computing. 35 countries have joined our framework for digital connectivity, known as the New York Principles, which we just launched at the UN. We are creating a single point of entry for the Exim Bank and Export Finance Australia, and we are working to streamline development finance mechanisms. All of this is possible because of our shared commitment to the rule of law and our history of collaboration and creativity. Perhaps most important is the work we're doing together to combat climate change and accelerate the green energy transition. At last year's meeting in Hiroshima, our leaders declared climate and clean energy the third pillar of the alliance. This commitment is real, and it is backed by action. In 2022, the Biden administration passed the historic bipartisan Inflation Reduction Act, which has already been a monumental stimulus for the climate fight globally. It has transformational implications for Australian industry, with over $3 billion invested in Australia in the past 2 years and another $19 billion in offtake agreements with U.S. auto companies. Australian companies investing in the U.S. are now eligible for IRA incentives on the same terms as U.S. companies. Australia is also investing at home to meet its own ambitious renewable targets, but we both need to do more. Conflicts in Europe and the Middle East have upended timelines and increased uncertainty. But the green energy transition is underway, and there's no turning back. That's why cooperating on critical minerals is more important than ever. We've allowed ourselves to become dependent on one country for processing, and we need to break this chokehold. It won't be easy, but the United States and Australia have the mineral supply, the financial resources, and the regulatory mechanisms to make it happen. Critical minerals are necessary not just for the technology of the future, but for the fight against climate change. We need to accelerate the work of the Critical Minerals Task Force, which is focused on market-based solutions. We need to map and build trusted supply chains, stockpile critical minerals, work together in third countries, and create a high standards marketplace. The focus on critical minerals began during the Trump administration, and it's been supercharged under President Biden. This is our generation's chance for government to show how it can create a greener future for people in their everyday lives. And my children, at least, don't think we have done a good enough job so far. Throughout my time here, people have asked me, including upstairs right before I came downstairs, what surprises you most about Australia? And after 2.5 years, I think I have an answer. And I'm still surprised that Australia doesn't always appreciate how important it is. Australia may be a middle power, but to the United States, you are number one. We have no more trusted or capable ally. In every dimension of our relationship, I've seen the United States rely on Australian leadership and experience. Australia is no longer America's deputy sheriff, or whatever the critics like to say. Australia is our partner and often our teacher as the United States navigates a multipolar world. That's true in our bilateral relationship, it's true in multilateral fora, and it is vital in this region. The President's belief in the United States as global power can be summed up by William Butler Yeats, who wrote, "Think where man's glory most begins and ends, and say, my glory was I had such friends." Australia is hands down our most glorious friend. And that's because of the generations of shared sacrifice, mateship, friendship, and service that came before us. I felt it during my first week here when I visited the War Memorial and saw the diary of the Coast Watcher who arranged my father's rescue in the Solomon Islands. And then a week later when I attended the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Guadalcanal in Honiara and looked out over the graveyard known as Iron Bottom Sound. I felt it at the commissioning of the USS Canberra, the first Navy ship to be commissioned in another country, and I saw the presentation of the Star-Spangled Kangaroo. I've been welcomed by the men and women of the Australian Defence Forces at Stirling Navy Base and the SAS Regiment at Campbell Barracks, who work day in and day out alongside their US counterparts to keep this region safe. I'm especially grateful to RAF Captain Matthew Bleachy and his team for taking me up in an F-18, making me the envy of diplomats worldwide, and annoying the US Admiral at Indo-PACOM. My clearest memory of the flight is of Bleachy asking me over and over again if I was sure I didn't have my hand on the eject lever. I've seen our common values in the First Nations communities who welcomed our first Indigenous Cabinet Secretary, Deb Haaland, and shared stories of the discrimination and injustice that have characterized both our histories. At Uluru, which Secretary Haaland said reminded her of her own Navajo reservation, we spoke with Dorothea Randall, TJ, and other members of the community. By the end, everyone was in tears, yet I think we all came out feeling stronger. And I saw it with our leaders. President Biden loves Irish poetry, which is why I just quoted that Yeats poem. I was there when he showed Prime Minister Albanese his signed copy of Seamus Heaney's The Cure at Troy, and they shared stories of tough and courageous Irish men and women who built lives far from home in our two countries. And like any two good Irishmen, they talked about their mothers. But both in the US and Australia, our future lies in our young generations who are learning from each other and working across culture and difference to build multicultural societies. I've loved getting to know the students at Bonnyrigg High School in Western Sydney and spending a few days with them at the Adelaide Festival, where they had a poetry slam with students from the from the South Bronx and Korea. New immigrants have inspired me at the citizenship ceremonies and university graduations I've attended, knowing that young Australians from around the world will be building a future together with young and diverse Americans. Now that my time here is coming to an end, people are also asking me what I will miss the most. I have a long list, but there are a few things I would just like to mention before I close. First, I would like to thank some of the amazing women who will continue to inspire me even when I'm 8,000 miles away. Violet Sheridan and Matilda House, who are here, and the Indigenous Women Rangers of the Great Barrier Reef, who won the Earthshot Prize, which was announced by Prince William at the JFK Library in Boston. Chantal Costos, Phoebe Santillan-Stocks, Holly Rankin, and the Matriarchy Club, who are giving voice to the next generation's vision for social justice and inclusion. Professor Emma Johnston and Professor Michelle Simmons are world-leading scientists who took the time to share their work with me. Shamara Wickraminyaki and Amanda Lacaze are leading the green energy transition in historically male industries. And there's no more impressive leader on the world stage than Foreign Minister Penny Wong, who is redefining Australia's role in the region and elevating its voice on the global stage. I will miss the Australian sense of humor and the fact that everyone has a nickname. I will miss the way Australians are up for anything and pitch in to help each other out. I will miss the amazing creatures here, from the magpies and whale sharks to my 2 new embassy sheep, Louie and Eli. I can't wait to come back and visit. There's so much left to see and do. Most of all, I know the best days for our alliance are yet to come. That's because of all the amazing Australians I've met and so many others like them. Thank you so much for having me, and I promise to tell the next ambassador how much fun I had at the Press Club.
Ambassador, maybe you could stay there.
What? Stay here.
Here for questions, is that okay?
Yeah.
Thanks. Well, thank you so much, Ambassador.
It's so quiet in here.
They're all obedient sometimes. You've mentioned AUKUS as one of the President's great ambitions and achievements. And I just wanted to ask you a couple of...
Sorry.
Well, a question about that, only one question.
Okay, sorry, what?
So, as you mentioned, there are several pillars of AUKUS. If I ask you about Pillar 1, which is about the submarines, as you say, it's 3 years till the US submarines come here, 8 years till we have our own sovereign-powered ones. But there is a discussion both in the US, reflected in the Congressional Research Service, and in Australia, about whether it actually makes sense for us to have our own submarines. You know, isn't it easier and probably more pragmatically sensible for the US to keep the submarines and base them here to achieve the same strategic interests as happens in, say, NATO, in its alliances with the US, and instead have Australia invest in things like long-range anti-ship missiles, drones, whatever loitering munitions are. I'm just reading the Congressional Service report here. Could you tell us, as one of your last bits of advocacy, why is it so much better for us to have sovereign submarines here, and before we even get to the question of building them here?
Well, first of all, it's an Australian decision of what is best for Australia. It's not a United States decision. And the decision about the AUKUS submarines was made by the Australian government. We respect the sovereignty of Australia. You don't have foreign bases in Australia, and we are well aware of that. So these are just rotational deployments. But I think that what it really shows is the collaboration and strong partnership that we have in working together in this region, which is the most important for our future. I mean, everyone knows the history of the 21st century is going to be written in the Indo-Pacific. And I think AUKUS is a critical way. It's already having a huge impact in deterrence and in keeping the peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific.
Okay. Ben Westcott has a question.
Ben Westcott from Bloomberg. Thank you very much for your speech, Ambassador, and thank you for your bravery in saying that the Fyshwick Bunnings is as good as Buckingham Palace. Truth universally acknowledged.
I hear you've been complaining about me in New York, by the way. But go ahead.
The re-election of Donald Trump shows that the trend of American first isolationism is not a accident or once-off. It's increasingly becoming a trend. To what extent should American allies in the region, including Australia, start preparing for a world without America?
Well, I don't think it shows that America is not going to be present in this region at all. When I got to Japan, I heard a lot of questions about American reliability, and when I got here, I heard the same thing. And President Biden has made, our alliances his absolute top foreign policy priority. And there are countless examples of how we have the continuity of our foreign policy, especially in this region. The United States is a Pacific nation, and what happens in this region is of vital national security, economic security, energy security to us. So as we've seen with the Quad, as we've seen with critical minerals, as we've seen really with AUKUS across the board, the United States has made commitments over many decades, and those are not going to change, and our national interest is not going to change. So there are going to be a lot of different, things said, as there have been during the recent campaign. But I think that overall, the United States needs our friends and allies, and we have such strong allies in this region: Japan, Korea, the Philippines. We are increasing our relationship with Vietnam, with Papua New Guinea. The Secretary of Defense is on his way to Laos, to PNG, the Philippines, and he came here. So I think that that is much more important than sort of whatever's, I don't mean any disrespect, but in the headlines.
Thanks very much.
Anna Henderson.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your speech and for the time you've given to SBS while you've been in Australia. Donald Trump's nominee for Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, is facing Democratic allegations that she's working for Russia and poses a threat to US national intelligence. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, a House Democrat, said, "There's no question I consider someone who is likely a Russian asset." Abigail Spanberger, another House Democrat in the Intelligence Committee and a former CIA case officer, says she's someone who's aligned herself with Vladimir Putin, Bashar al-Assad, and trafficked in Russian-backed conspiracy theories. Australia's facilities such as Pine Gap contribute to US intelligence and early warning capabilities. Considering the influence of presidential leadership on US defence policy and the incoming commitment to try and make political appointments in the public service in the US, why should Australia trust the United States with sensitive intelligence and Five Eyes intelligence going forward?
Well, there are thousands of people who work in our intelligence agencies and work closely with Australia, and we have no more trusted or capable ally, and that's going to continue. So let's see what happens with President Trump's appointments. They've been catching, making waves, headlines. There's another one who's nominated for Health and Human Services. So let's just calm down and wait and see what happens. But obviously that would be of great concern, and we'll see who actually gets confirmed.
Stephen Jedgetts.
Hi, Ambassador. Stephen Jedgetts from ABC. On climate policy, under the Biden administration, as you referenced, climate change has been a third pillar of the alliance. But given what the President-elect has said about climate change, and given his stated desire to wind back the Inflation Reduction Act, can climate change realistically remain a pillar of the alliance under the President-elect? And do you have any advice whatsoever for the Australian government about how it might preserve scraps of cooperation around climate change, even if Donald Trump does withdraw the US, as he's expected to do, out of the Paris Agreement?
Well, I think that the climate change, the green energy transition is underway. The private sector supports it. There's no turning back. Other nations are committed. And there are many, many lines of effort that it's going to take to do that. And so our work in critical minerals, which started under the first Trump administration, is going to continue and become increasingly necessary. It fits with our geopolitical assessment, but it also is critical to addressing climate change. There is work that's going to be happening across the region that started during the Trump administration last time. So I think this is a multifaceted effort, and there are plenty of areas at which we can continue to cooperate to address this challenge. Maybe not as fast or in different ways, but I think there's I think the work is going to continue even if it changes some emphasis.
Matthew Knott.
Thanks for your time today, Ambassador. As I'm sure you're very aware, Democrats in the United States are doing a lot of soul-searching about the election result. I was wondering if you could tell us, as a member of Democratic Party royalty, what lessons you're thinking about why a majority of Americans chose to re-elect Donald Trump, and if you could dwell on two particular factors. Will America be ready to elect a female president in your lifetime? And should Joe Biden have stepped down earlier to give another candidate a chance to have a run?
Is there anything else?
One question.
Well, I know America's going to elect a woman president in my lifetime, so that is easy. But I think
Will it be you?
What?
Will it be you?
No way. In terms of, I don't even remember what you asked me. It was so long ago.
What does it say
Why
about
did the
America
Democrats
today?
What?
What does it say about America today?
Well, I
that
think
turned
we're
back to
seeing,
Donald Trump.
obviously, Donald Trump's victory is remarkable and it's comprehensive, and it's very broad because he controls the Supreme Court and both houses of Congress and the executive. So there's no doubt about that. But it was also not deep. And so I think that as we have Australians follow U.S. politics incredibly closely. So you all know that there are 7 swing states, and that's really where the things get decided. And some of those are quite close. And so they flip back and forth. And so I think you're seeing a wave of anti-incumbency. You're seeing cost of living driving the election. The U.S., I hate to break it to you, but U.S. elections are mostly decided on domestic issues and the economy. And obviously, cost of living is a huge issue at home, just like it is here. And our economies are doing well, but people aren't feeling it. And so I think that was probably the most important factor. And then there's all kinds of speculation about what else could have happened, should happen, President Biden and Kamala Harris. But I think that the vice president ran an amazing campaign and I think brought a whole new generation into politics that is not going to stop advocating for what they believe in. And so Donald Trump and the Trump administration have 2 years until the midterms. During President Biden's midterms, the Democrats did a lot better than anyone expected. And so we just have to see what happens, what they do in these 2 years. And if you invite me back when I'm no longer ambassador, we can discuss this further in more detail.
We're noting that. Thank you. Rosie Lewis.
Rosie Lewis from The Australian. Donald Trump has said US allies should pay more for America's protection. So is Australia spending enough on defence? And on the other side of the ledger, what's the strategic value to the US of Australia's geographic position?
Well, Australia should make its own decisions about how much it's spending. And I know that your defence spending is projected to rise. And I think that's not just because of Donald Trump. That's because of the changing geostrategic forces in this region. And your leaders all describe it, as do ours, as the most dangerous time since the Second World War. So all countries, Japan is doubling its defense budget. So I think that most people are in agreement with President Trump on that. Australia is also contributing to the US industrial base in helping us accelerate the production of Virginia-class submarines, as well as investing in your own defense industrial base and standing up AUKUS and transforming the workforce here. So that is a massive undertaking that is happening here. And it's amazing to watch it at the beginning, and I can't wait to see how it grows over time and all the new jobs and industries that are created here. And in terms of what is the value to the United States of Australia's location, well, the Pacific is really big, and we are we are a Pacific nation. We have a long border on the Pacific. We have the state of Hawaii. We have relationships with the COFA states. This region is critical to our economy. It's critical to our identity. We have communities in the United States from all across the Pacific. And Australia shares our values. You're committed to the rule of law, to individual freedom. And our militaries have fought and sacrificed for our freedom and our rights for more than 100 years. So I think that it's not only about location, but it's about values and ideals and a sense of what kind of future world we want for our children. And we're aligned on all those.
Andrew Tillett.
Thanks, Laura. Andrew Tillett from the Financial Review. Ambassador, you sort of broke the ice by alluding to that there will be a Kennedy in the next administration as the Health Secretary.
I had to go first, right? Someone else is
I note in your speech you spoke about the value of vaccines for population health and things like that. Obviously, your cousin is being accused of spreading vaccine scepticism. Last week, a few weeks ago, talked about taking fluoride out of the water, which for fans of Dr. Strangelove would be very familiar to if people have seen the greatest movie made. But what I'd like to ask, though, is, I mean, are you concerned about that such views would risk becoming mainstreamed by part of the administration? And do you feel also, too, that they're only becoming mainstreamed, essentially your cousin is being platformed because of who he is, the family name, and it's tarnishing the family reputation, the Kennedy reputation?
Well, I'm a sitting ambassador, and I'm not supposed to comment on politics, but and now you're asking me to also comment on family, so that's really a lot. Yes, I think Bobby Kennedy's views on vaccines are dangerous, but I don't think that most Americans share them. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens, but certainly he's, I grew up with him, so I've known all this for a long time, and others are just getting to know him. But that's my Uncle Teddy spent 50 years fighting for affordable health care in the Senate, and it's something that our whole family is so proud of, that President Obama signed the Affordable Care Act, and it was built on the work that my uncle had done over many years. My Aunt Eunice started Special Olympics, and the National Institute of Maternal and Child Health is now named after her. So I would say that our family is united in terms of our support for the public health sector and infrastructure, and has the greatest admiration for the medical profession in our country. And Bobby Kennedy has got a different set of views.
Thank you. Thank you for your time here. Thank you.
Andrew Green.
Ambassador Kennedy, Andrew Green from the ABC. During your time here, you've seen the largest concentration of US personnel in Australia since World War II. We're seeing expansion of facilities for American B-52 aeroplanes, and nuclear submarines are on their way, certainly to rotate out of Australia. What do you say to people that are observing a trend towards Australia, in their words, becoming the 51st state and being dragged closer to any war in the future with China?
Well, I think the point of all of those things is to prevent any kind of conflict. Those are all decisions that are made by the Australian government about what's in Australia's best interest. In the Defence Strategic Review, it was clearly stated that this is the most dangerous geostrategic environment that Australia has faced since the Second World War. So I think that all of those measures are put in place to deter any kind of conflict, not to encourage it. And we just saw last weekend in Darwin, the Japanese Minister of Defense, who was actually Minister of Defense when I was in Japan as well, meeting with Secretary Austin and DPM to talk about increasing cooperation between our three countries. training together, doing exercises, sharing information. And that's all because of the rising threat in the region that countries are all perceiving. So I think that it's really the region reacting to the sort of destabilizing moves that have been made in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and preparing for any kind of contingency, because it would be irresponsible not to. But I think the idea here is to preserve the rules-based order that has lifted millions of people out of poverty and created unprecedented opportunity for America and Australia.
Dominic Giannini.
Ambassador, thank you for your speech. I just wanted to ask, you called us best friends, but publicly almost every question directed at our ministers are about tariffs or about AUKUS submarines. Does that doubt, should that be in a best friendship? Should best friends really have to fight for tariff exemptions and for submarine deals made under the office of the President?
Well, our FTA is about to be 20 years old, and there's unprecedented two-way investment, record levels of trade happening every single year. We're beating the year before. The U.S. invests here. We're the biggest source of foreign investment. So I think that, as I said, Australia qualifies for, under the Defence Production Act, and it has a status that no other country except for the UK has. So I think that all of those things do contribute to our being best friends. And I don't think Australia actually was subject to the tariffs under the previous Trump administration. So there's a lot of things that get said in the campaign. But I think that if you look at the positive side of it, which is maybe not as appealing sometimes, you'll see that I think Australia has a very privileged position, and that's because we work so closely together across the board.
Thank you.
Nicola Smith.
Ambassador, thanks for taking our questions. President Biden has indicated several times during his presidency that the US would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion. Donald Trump, meanwhile, has put Taiwan on notice that it's stealing the US chip sector. Can Taiwan rely on the US to help it maintain the status quo, or could its security be undermined by a more unpredictable and transactional approach to the Indo-Pacific, and what would that mean for the region and for Australia?
Well, I don't really want to speculate on sort of Taiwan contingency or uncertainty, but the US has been committed to Taiwan for decades, and we are committed, and President Biden has made that clear. So I think that we'll see what happens in a Trump administration, but I think the United States is a reliable ally, and I'm not going to get into like President Trump's mind. If that's okay with you.
That's fine.
I really don't want to go there.
Paul Karp.
Thanks very much for your speech. Vice President-elect J.D. Vance in September warned NATO allies if they want the US to be a good ally, there were, quote, strings attached, and they've got to sign up to US values like free speech, including winding back the regulation of big tech and social media. Now, that's just one example of an area of public policy, but it shows for the incoming Trump administration, things aren't always determined by national interest or shared values. Sometimes it's about imposition of US power, and sometimes it's a very transactional form of politics. So could I ask, please, the AUKUS alliance and Australia's strong desire to be exempted from tariffs, do those make us vulnerable to those sorts of threats from the incoming Trump administration?
Well, I think the AUKUS alliance is obviously was a sovereign decision made by Australia. So, and it has bipartisan support in Congress, including in the Republican majority, incoming majority. So I know Ambassador Rudd has been working very hard to build those relationships and strengthen them, and both the US and Australia are committed to making AUKUS a reality and have met, as Secretary Austin pointed out, every single benchmark that we've set. So I am completely confident that that is going to continue. And in terms of the tariffs, we just have to wait and see what really happens. Who knows? But also, as the Prime Minister suggested, Australia could come out ahead either way. So this is all speculation, and we're picking out sort of the most inflammatory and frightening things that were said. Free speech is a bedrock of both of our systems. So the question is, how does it get interpreted, and big tech and Elon Musk and all of that. So I think we just have to wait and see. And I'm sure that both Americans and Australians are committed to these bedrock principles of alliances and freedom.
Finn McHugh.
Hi, Ambassador. Finn McHugh from Capital Brief. One of the appointments that Trump has made that's flown under the radar is incoming Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, who says there's no such thing as a Palestinian or the West Bank, and asked last week whether annexation of the West Bank was a possibility under Trump. He said, of course. Do you think the Trump administration could be paving the way to allow Israel to annex the West Bank? And if so, can you see that causing any frictions in the relationship with Canberra?
I can't speculate on anything that the Trump administration is going to do, especially in the Middle East, where I have not spent any time. But obviously, I was present at a campaign rally in 2008 where Governor Huckabee got a cell phone call from God Almighty, and he talked to him on the phone in front of a large audience. So I don't know.
Jess Wang.
Thank you, Ambassador. Jessica Wang from Newswire. What have been your key achievements in your role as ambassador in the last 2 years? And in your opinion, what does an ambassador serve in nations where the relationship is strong compared to a nation where the relationship might be more strained?
Well, I've been really privileged to serve as ambassador in two of our closest allies, in Japan and here in Australia. And it's been a real privilege to be in this region twice over a 10-year period, because I saw how things changed and how different the strategic circumstances are. And so I felt well prepared to come here. I think there are big differences, obviously, between Japan and Australia, but I think we're all committed to preserving the peace and stability in this region. So I think, I can't imagine a greater honor. Both of those positions have had tremendous personal meaning for me, given my father's history in the Pacific and the fact that he wanted to be the first president to visit Japan and also Australia. And I talked about it with Prime Minister Menzies, as you can see from the records in the Kennedy Library. So it's very different, obviously, and I haven't served as ambassador in a country with whom the United States has a difficult relationship. But many of my embassy colleagues here have done that, and that's why it's such a privilege to work with all of them, because they provide a global outlook and a perspective that I wouldn't otherwise have. And so I guess you asked me first about what? Being an ambassador?
Your biggest achievements in the
biggest achievements. Well, I am part of a team, and I feel like the job of an ambassador is to empower the people on the team to use my visibility or access or status to help the larger relationship move along during the time that I'm here. So obviously AUKUS is the major achievement. Passing that legislation was absolutely critical. But in every area of our work, I think that I've seen tremendous progress, and I'm proud to have been a part of it, whether that's in the Pacific and getting the US, Japan, Australia, thanks to Australia's leadership, to contribute to increasing the amount of subsea cables that will connect the islands. AUKUS, obviously, I just mentioned. We just had the third meeting of the Critical Minerals Task Force with Minister King and Assistant National Security Advisor Amos Hochstein to talk about some of the ideas for critical minerals. The Quad, as I said, I think the Cancer Moonshot is directly related to the work that Australia is doing. So I think the job of an ambassador is also to get good ideas from the country that you're serving in and make sure that Washington knows about those. But it's been great to see us work not only bilaterally, but also increase our cooperation in the Pacific, in law enforcement, in maritime domain awareness, in, like I said, in removing ordnance, and bringing Peace Corps back into the region, because every time I meet someone from the Pacific Island, they all talk about how they were educated by the Peace Corps, and it's certainly something, part of my family legacy that I'm tremendously proud of, because I think it really shows the United States is here to share our resources and our people with the world, and to learn from others and bring that back home to the United States. And that's really what the Peace Corps has done. And I'm so glad they're coming back into this region.
Thank you.
Jason Katsoukas.
Ambassador, thanks again for your speech. Your opposite number in Washington, D.C., Kevin Rudd, has come under some pressure for some comments he's made on social media about the president-elect. Do you have any thoughts about whether Kevin Rudd's position in Washington is tenable? Can he remain in that position? And do you have any advice for Ambassador Rudd as to how he might
that is an awesome question.
Conduct himself?
Ambassador Rudd has the full confidence of the Prime Minister, and whoever the ambassador is a choice for the government that sends them to Washington, D.C. I will say that I've seen Ambassador Rudd. He's incredibly energetic. He's forged really strong relationships in Congress on both sides of the aisle. You know, I'm sure he is fully capable. I've seen Australians argue, so I'm sure he's capable of dealing with whatever comes.
Melissa Code.
Thanks for your speech, Ambassador. Melissa Code from the Mandarin. You made a reference in your address to the investment in AUKUS being an existential one. Something else that's just as existential to many democracies around the world is the threat of polarisation, misinformation, and also a sort of erosion of trust for national institutions, which I guess also speaks to the rules-based order that you also advocate for. The so-called Department of Government Efficiency, which will be head up by Elon Musk and Mr. Ramaswamy, has a lot of rhetoric swirling around it about how much we invest in the civil service, and perhaps a little less conversation about the impact of good government. I raise this because I wonder if it will be an issue for Australia as we also head towards our election, this idea of small government good, government that costs less better. Does it concern you that perhaps we've not been able to articulate to the community at large during times of economic difficulty that government is complex and it's difficult and it costs money? And do you think perhaps this discourse may further undermine the way we look at institutions in the future? How do we protect them?
Well, I think that one of the things that I've been proudest of is, and I saw it more when I was going to Japan, was that, you know, under President Kennedy, a whole generation of people entered government service because he asked them to give back. And those people are reaching retirement age now. But I think that I saw in the State Department a whole generation of more diverse foreign service officers came in under President Bush, under Condoleezza Rice, under General Powell. And so I think that every generation is going to attract people to government who really believe in the power in its power to make people's lives better. Certainly under President Obama, after 9/11, we saw lots of people sign up to be part of government. So I'm not worried about that, but I do find the rhetoric around that's demoralizing, and so I think that makes it more difficult for the people who are committed to public service. And I think that when, you know, we can't take for granted all the things that we have, our rights and freedoms, and those require us to take on responsibilities as well. So I think it's up to the rest of us to make the case of why government is so critical and what it would be like if we didn't have the kind of safety nets that we have. But I understand that people are facing tough times, and there are communities that have been hollowed out, and they don't feel like the government has been listening to them. And so government has to address those people and their problems as well.
Does this disaffectation make the job of statecraft and an ambassador more difficult?
Well, I think you can't really generalize because, like I said, there's people here from the embassy who have served all over the world. So in every country, I think it's different. But certainly if the whole world went through the pandemic, and I think we're still, coming out of it. So so it's going to be up to, us all to advocate for what we believe in. And certainly it's a lot harder in some places than it is in others.
Nick Stewart.
I remember asking you when you'd first arrived what the big difference between Australia and America was.
And now you just asked me again upstairs.
Now it's Bunnings.
Yeah.
But what else is there? I mean, as we go on, we've got an increasing number of Asian immigrants here. We're becoming very different countries. What is it that will keep Australia and America together, if anything, under particularly administrations that are going their own way, like Trump's?
Well, I think that, what I've seen is that the people, the younger people in America and Australia care about the same things. So they care about the climate, they care about the planet, they care about peace and stability, they care about creativity and free expression, and they want to learn from each other and learn about different cultures. They want to learn across differences. And expand the rights of everybody in our societies and deal with our historic injustices. So in that way, I think there's so much more that we have in common. And I have a lot of faith in the next generation. I think that, our generation has a lot to answer for, but I think that they're going to do a really good job.
Jane Norman.
Ambassador, thanks for your address today. Jane Norman from the ABC and also a board director here at the club. We've covered an enormous amount of ground, so I think maybe we'll finish.
Oh, good, yeah, we really have.
We really have. And thinking of questions, I'm like, nope, all of my questions have been asked. I wanted to ask about big tech and social media. Here we have the two major parties in Australia really seeking to clamp down on usage to protect the current and next generations of younger Australians, and looking at things like a ban on access of social media for younger people. Do you reckon that's realistic? Like, to what extent can we actually regulate the use of social media now? And do you think the US, I'm not sure now that Elon Musk has a very high profile in America and a position of power, but do you think the US would ever move to a similar ban to the one that Australia is trying to put in place?
Well, I do know that our Surgeon General has called out the threat to young people from social media and all the impacts that it's had on loneliness and mental health and isolation. So I think this is a concern in both societies. The way to deal with it, I'm not really sure how we regulate that, and I haven't really studied sort of the proposals for doing that. So it's certainly something that families, schools, communities are going to have to deal with, and to educate kids about the kinds of information, how to evaluate it, and how to connect with their peers, not online as well as online. So it's a huge challenge and it's a huge transformation. And usually government is behind when it comes to technology. So whatever regulation comes in is obviously going to have to be adapted over time, but it's certainly a concern in both our countries.
If I could just pick up a couple of your comments in relation to some answers you've given. You mentioned that the election result was sort of comprehensive but not deep, and that there was this flip-flopping driven by a lot of current factors like incumbency and cost of living. But Melissa was also talking to you about the civil service. And I remember when Donald Trump last won, talking to people here in the States about what was going to happen at a similar time. And they were saying, oh, look, it's fine. The system will protect the US against anything really terrible. But we then saw Michael Lewis in his book, The Fifth Risk, documented the sort of impact that the Trump administration had on large areas of the civil service, if only by neglect, by not appointing people, areas like energy and agriculture. I just wondered if you could reflect on how much the system in America has been changed since President-elect Trump was first elected. What sort of impact did that have? I understand you don't want to really predict what might happen next, but I'm interested in your perspective on how it did change America.
I think COVID happened. So that, I think, was a huge change. And so I think that we're still feeling the effects of that. And I wasn't in government, and I wasn't in DC at that time. But I think that the civil service did protect America. Certainly the military and all people in all the agencies really, I think, did an outstanding job in preserving the institutions. I think that we've heard, people are not happy with the way that things are, so we'll see what happens. But I still have confidence in our public service and in our institutions. And I think that, but I know that in a democracy, you really can't take anything for granted, and it's a constant, it requires constant effort. And I saw that again with my Uncle Teddy, who, there are setbacks along the way, as there have been throughout our history. And as President Biden likes to say, you can't just love your country when you win. So I'm incredibly proud of the United States and the government that we have. And I think President Trump is incredibly fortunate to be able to lead it and to lead the public officials that serve. So I think anybody who has that experience, I think, comes away really impressed with the commitment, the patriotism, the talent in our public service. So I think we just have to hope that that happens to them.
Well, as a thank you for coming along today, we're giving you a membership of the National Press Club, which gives you rights in the press clubs in New York and Washington. But most importantly, it gives you free parking here at the National Press Club for when you come back to see us.
Sure.
So thank you so much.